Okay, and so I want to welcome you to Flourishing Potted Garden, and it really is my 101 course on getting potted in the desert. And even if people who've gone for it before, they always say that they will learn something more, and they never go away disappointed, even if they've taken it before. Um, so we're ready to go. And so this is a program I created years ago. Actually, I first started doing it at the Tucson Botanical Gardens, and I've shared it with many gardening clubs around the southern part of Arizona. And so if anyone has a nice sized garden club or connections with one, the next year, this time in September, October, I'll be back in Tucson and would be happy to do some club talks, and hopefully we'll have one or two over at the Botanical Gardens. So these just show you my book and some of my things that I started the Contained Gardener back in 1998 as a service to homeowners to help them have a beautiful potted garden with flowers, because that's what I was looking for, and to do it in the desert climate. And you know what I've come to find really is anyone can teach you how to grow things in pots from anywhere around the world, the country, anywhere. But it's special when you're in the desert. And so that's what I concentrate on, is how to create these gorgeous pots for many of us, like back home, but to do it with the desert in mind. So that's what we're going to start on today with our Flourishing Potted Gardens. So we dive right in, and this is one of the things I totally harp on, is that if you are planting in the sun, and really in any level of sun, as far as how many hours a day in the sun, you want a pot that is minimum in size of 18 inches. And when I say that, 18 inches is the interior diameter of the pot. So you don't want to measure outside rim to outside rim, because a rim could lose you anywhere from 1 to 4 inches, depending on the thickness of it. So it's 18 inches inside diameter. Now the thing is, in recent years, I really would like to see you go above 20 inches. And so just think about, you know, what you want to do and how much risk you want to take. The reason is that you want to have enough soil area to give the plants the room to grow, plus the room to grow in the heat, because soil will act as an insulation. And so if you're trying to put the plants in a very small pot, everything is getting hotter because there's not as much volume. So you want the size so that you have enough soil for the kind of planting you're doing and be able to insulate those roots. Now the exceptions are when you're in planting in the shade, and also your succulents and cactus can go in smaller pots. And both are obvious. Shade doesn't get the sun, and so you can do a lot of things with your smaller pots, which I'll talk about later. And then also succulents and cactus, you want the cactus soil to dry out. And so it's okay to go smaller, but you also want to think about your aesthetics and small pots. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. Now, when you're choosing your pots, you have to think about the shape and what the root needs are of the plants that you're planting, and different kinds of things that make sure you have the best pot that you can use for your garden. And so one of the things is growth rate. There are many plants that grow very fast. So if you're in the nursery and you're reading the sign, and your local nurseries will have these kinds of signs, fast grower, because you know how some people go, I want a fast growing shade tree because I want to create shade as fast as I can. So that's what you want to think about, because you have a finite amount of space in a pot. And if it's a fast grower, then you're going to have to deal with that growth in the pot, because it's going to quickly outgrow the pot. One of my favorite examples is the Meyer lemon tree. Meyer, yes. When they allowed them back into Arizona a few years ago, and I planted one, I planted it in the pot, and I was like, oh my heavens, this thing is growing so fast. And we immediately took it out of the pot and got it into the ground. And I know that they have some now that are on your dwarf rootstock, when that will slow down the size. But I think that if you really want lemons, that there are other citrus that are better suited for pots than the lemon. And I would put the lemon in the ground. It's a strong grower. You're going to have a lot more fruit. And you can save your large pots for some other kinds of trees. Another, and another plant that grows so fast is the octopus agave. And it's that spiderly leafy agave that the leaves go way out and kind of droop around and things, and they produce millions of babies at the same time. They're a dime a dozen. You know, nobody can get people to pay for them usually because there's so many to give away, and they grow very, very fast. Now, because of that grassy-like shape, they're cool to put in a really low bowl pot. But because they grow so fast, their roots grow really fast, and they push themselves off the bottom of the pot so that they're pushing up above your soil. So then they look like they want to jump out of the pot. So it's not worth it to put them in there. Whereas a plant, many other agaves are very slow growing, like the Queen Victoria. She just grows so slowly, and it's so nice. And golden barrels, they grow so slowly that it's nice to put them in pots because you're not going to have to worry about them too soon. Another thing you want to think about in choosing pots are your transplant issues. And so if you have a, oops, sorry. Uh-oh. Oh, good. Nope. I have to go back, sorry. Okay. If you have a plant that you know you're going to have to transplant eventually, or you find you do, like this asparagus fern, the second picture from the left, then you want to really think about what kind of pot you put it in, because if you put it into this lovely brown pot to its right, those roots are going to come down in the middle section of the pot, and you're going to be unable to pull it out through that narrow neck. And so having an asparagus fern or a rooted plant like that is going to be very difficult to transplant. And so you wouldn't want to choose a closed neck pot like this one. You'd rather, if you're going to put it in a pot, the last picture on the right is a V-shaped pot, which is my favorite type pot as far as its shape, to put things in that you're going to have to transplant larger plants back out of, or to root prune. And so what I do in these narrow neck pots, I'll often put a smaller, even plastic pot down inside of it to just have it in here so that you can lift that pot out and do what you need to do with the planting. And then you're not even having to put soil all the way down in the bottom, because you have an interior pot resting right on this neck, and it'll sit right up in there. And so the V-shaped pot or U-shape over on this right-hand pot is the very best, because it gives you so many opportunities. There's lots of space to plant. And if you do need to root prune or transplant something out of it, it'll be very easy to get things out. So we're going to go into types of pots, and remember 18 inches or greater. So that's way over here on the right. And you know what you can do is you could take one of those pocket tape measures with you, and that way you can double check, because when you buy a pot, if the dimensions are on it, they are going to be listed as the exterior diameter, because that's what most people want, because they've measured the space a pot is going to go into, and so that's the measurement they're concerned about. But as far as what we want to make sure we're getting 18 inches. Or you could take a string, maybe make the string be 3 feet, but make a mark on it at 8, or a knot at 18 inches, and then you know where it is right away. And you know, I'll ask people when I have you in front of me, and I say, okay, show me 18 inches, and a lot of people are here and are here. You know, 18 inches is right about there, and so you'll get used to how big that is. So the first type pot are Tuscan or Old World pots, and these are made out of clay. Now what you're going to hear me talk about is high fire pots. And high fired means that they've been fired at very, very, very high temperatures. They're uppers of like 2,000 degrees. And it's best to buy high fired pots because they're, number one, going to last forever. The water that we have in our desert communities, it has a very high pH, a lot of salt content, calcium buildup. And so if they're not high fired, that will leach out the pots. And so if you've had some clay pots, the regular clay or Mexican pots, and they've turned white on the outside and they're getting really, they're very porous and they're starting to wear away, then that's because they're not high fired. And so these kinds of pots, which are from Italy and even maybe China, they're high fired, and so they're not going to be as porous, and they're not going to let as much calcium buildup happen on the outside of the pots. Then another kind, which I absolutely love, are the rustic organic style pots. And these are glazed. They're often glazed in a high gloss or a matte finish. And their colors are more earth tones. And so these are great when you want to have a planting that is going into your landscape instead of standing out from the landscape. And or you just want some kind of pot that will support gorgeous flowers and you don't want the pot itself to take away from them. So these are absolutely high fired, and the glazing also protects the pot from leaching out the salts. You'll see very little come out from them unless there's maybe a little crack in the surface. And these pots are going to last forever. These and the glazed pots, which I'm going to show you next, they're just going to last forever. In fact, I work a lot with the Pottery Blowout in Tucson, and Frank, the owner, would say when they do an archaeological dig in Tucson, that these pots are going to be found, and if they're broken, it's only because something has hit them. And but if they haven't been, damaged by something moving against them, they're going to find them in the digs, and they're going to be like, whoa, what did these people do? They're not water vessels because they have holes in them. So these are great. And they come in all different shapes and sizes, a lot of selection, and you'll find them pretty much around most nurseries and pottery stores throughout the Arizona areas. And here at the bottom, I say choose the largest pot that you're willing to spend your money on. And so that's what you want to do when you think about, well, what size pot? At least 18 inches, yes. But if you're putting a pot, like if you can see back here against that wall, if I had an 18-inch pot back there, then that's going to kind of get minimized as it goes further away from me when I'm inside the house over here. And so I would rather put a 24 minimum to even a 28, 30-inch pot against that wall. And unless I was going for height. So we're not getting into design today, but we really want to think, well, what size pot do I want? And make sure that it's above that dimension. And then how much you're willing to spend your money on. Then your high color glazed pots, these again then are of course high fired because they've got a glazing on them, and that glaze is not painted on, it's fired into the pots, so that makes them extremely durable. They're going to last forever, and they come in all color, shapes, and sizes. And so you'll see here the standard bowl size on the right, or shape on the right, and those have rims. And then you see some more vertical pots on the left, and those are rimless, which you could use more in a contemporary kind of setting. And some of these you have to be careful because the 18-inch rule is going to be broken, like in this pot that's tall and square. That's probably not an 18-inch pot. And so if it had morning sun, that would probably be okay for the plants, or if you had a planting that wasn't so concerned about keeping the soil moist. You just don't want to be watering your pots twice a day because that becomes a new marriage for you. So you can use these, and there's lots of things as we go on in other courses about how I talk about using different, making exceptions in the desert, then we get more into it. But don't be afraid of these kinds of pots. They'll work great. Concrete pots are absolutely wonderful in our heat, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Their colors, you can get them stained, and the stain is blended into the concrete, and you can get them sealed or unsealed, and you just want to make sure you know where they're going to go before you put them in and place them, because otherwise you're going to have 4 guys come and move them for you. But they're great if you have more of an old world type home, a traditional home, or you've used things like Cantera stone or different kinds of flagstone. Then you might decide that the look of the concrete pots goes more with your decor. And they come with drainage holes. You can get them with or without saucers. And there's a company that is in the Phoenix area that will travel pretty much around southern Arizona with deliveries, both commercial and residential. They just won't go upstairs. You can understand why. They're heavy. So before I get into the small pots, you want to think about what I haven't talked about. I haven't talked about plastic pots. I haven't talked about metal pots or metal containers, and nursery cans, the pots that the nursery plants come in. I haven't talked about them, and that's because I recommend you don't use them. Now, one of the things that's common about all the pots I've just talked about is that they have a relatively thick wall. And where your plastic pots, you know, it's almost paper thin, not quite, but almost paper thin. So that heat is bearing down on there. And your black cans from the nursery, they're fine to hold plants in the shade, but you get them out in the sun, and that heat is going to go right through that plastic, and the black plastic is the worst. You think, well, the nurseries have them, why can't I? And what they're doing is, if they have a whole row, let's say 4 across and 20 long, of plants in those black pots, then they're rotating them. They don't leave those front ones in the front all the time. They are rotated so that they get a break from it. And also you'll see them putting other plants in pots, usually on the ends, so that those are giving shade actually to the rest of them. So temporarily, yes. In the sun, no. But I would get your plants out into where they're going to live permanently. Plastic pots, too thin, and also your home deserves better. So your plastic pots, you can use them as interior pots. You could put them over for your orphan plants, your rescue plants, and in your potting area, in a shady area, and things like that. But to put them out on your patio, in your yard, to me, you're wasting your money. They're going to also, the sun is going to cause them to break sooner, and also the coloring will dissipate from them. So stay away from plastic pots. Now there's always an exception. So the propylene pots that are the lightweight pots, but they look like clay pots, that is good as long as the wall is thicker than a plastic pot. When they first came out with them, their walls were probably a half to an inch, and they were great. And as they, I think, made them less expensive, what they did was the rim was thick, but then as you came down inside the pot, it became a very thin wall. So be discriminating in your choice on that, and make sure you have a thicker wall in there. And they're lovely because they're easy to move. Even when you plant them, they're not as heavy as a clay pot. And they usually won't come with a drainage hole, so you have to hammer out a hole for them. And you can do that with nail and hammer, no problem. But just make sure that you're not choosing one that's a thin wall. Also, fiberglass pots are okay. I just don't see too many of them because they are really, really expensive. And metal pots, the big metal pots or containers are fine. But what I recommend is that you line them on the sun sides with sheeting of insulation. And I've done that. It works great. and you just run sheets on the sides, and if you have to cut it so it curves, but that works really well to get some insulation to that soil. And then you can have your pots that way, the metal pots. And I've had a client had a wheelbarrow, and we planted that all the time. But it was in eastern side under a little ramada, so it really only got the early morning sun, and it did fine that way. So like I say, there's always exceptions. And so then handling the small pots, and I remember I said that you could take the plastic pots over to your potting area and use them for different things. But also, you know, we collect small pots. You know, we go to Trader Joe's and they've got, oh, such a cute plant, and it's in a little pot, and we bring it home, and then that plant, when it's done, we're left with this pot, and we're like, oh, what can I do with it? Well, what you want to do is make these pots into something like have an art form with your little pots. And some of them, they don't deserve to be art. And so you put them aside. But you can use a baker's rack or a sofa table out on your patio and plant some succulents in them. You know, a lovely pot could be like a vase that you just have up. It doesn't have to be filled. You could also take a nice pot and store your pruners and things in it and keep it up so people can't see down in there. Like the white pot on the top shelf here of this picture, if that was empty and you put your pruners and your gloves and things in there, and it would just be an art form right there, but it'd be a handy one for you. And so you can do things with plants that would be fun to have in the shade, or in the morning, early morning sun only, and that you can use the small pots for and put them on display as an art form. So things, the SSP are what we used to call stupid small pots, and that was our nickname for them because, sorry, but often I'd go to a new potential client's home, and right by their posts of their patio, they would have like 5 or 7 of the small pots right there. And, you know, they're a tripping hazard. So you don't want them down on the ground. And would you put a little table that's this tall next to your sofa? You know, no, you're not going to do that. So why are we putting little pots down on the ground where we can't even see them? So that's what you would do. Think about using, and you know, if you have that favorite pot that's small and it's from your Aunt Mildred, and you don't want you want it to always be out because she was special aunt and you want her to be reminded to you all the time, then have a place to display it and find a beautiful succulent or plant that can be in the shade and leave it out there. Or you could bring your Trader Joe's plants that are shade and put them in there, and when they're gone, replace it so that Aunt Mildred always has a new plant. So any questions on the pots? And you can, I can't see you, you can open up your video, you can open up your mic, and any questions you'd like.
Looking at my notes.
Oh.
My general plan is to buy one large pot, maybe a year, until I get a collection of them.
Okay.
Does that sound like a reasonable plan, or is there a better one to go with?
Well, not knowing your yard, it's hard for me to say. One way you can think about it, depending on the budget, is you could think about it a couple ways. Maybe 2 a year, so that each season when you're planting summer versus planting winter, you have a pot to add. And if you're going to work in groups of 3, so maybe one pot's a 24-inch and then a 20 or 22 and then an 18, and they're going to become a grouping, you know, see if you can do a trio at the same time. Mm-hmm. And because especially when some places, at least in the Tucson area, have sales, and sometimes it's buy one, get one 50% off or something like that. And so make sure you know who's giving sales. Usually it's not the nurseries, usually it's the pottery stores, and think about it that way. So it just depends on your budget, and then go from there and see what you can do. But you know, if you had a yard where you really only wanted large pots, like extra large, like 28 inches, and say your goal is to have 5 of them spread out. You have a large yard and there are 5 spread out all through the yard, and with large plantings, then maybe 1 year is what you can handle. And so just deciding how can you do it, but in groups of 3 or 1 a season would be optimal.
Okay.
And not 4 seasons, just 2 seasons.
Right. And so it sounds like before I actually purchase one, I have to decide where they're going to be located.
At least an idea. The beauty about pots is that they can be moved. And so if you change your mind as you're here longer, you can move things around. And so it'd be nice to have an idea of what you think you're going to want, and go for, or at least, or another way to think about it, if your yard can be divided into zones, then think, well, in this zone, I think I want this, and maybe I'll finish a zone at a time. So it just depends on your yard. Like some people want to work on the patio and then go out into the yard.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about your rooms that you're in your mind creating in your design.
Okay.
And just a little side note that I do offer online consultations where you take me to your yard with your cell phone. And we could come up with a plan. So that's just available to you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else with a question about pots?
Yeah, this is Gay. Are there, I've been to some of the nurseries and I've been to a pottery store. Are there pottery stores that you find have very good selections? Anything, I don't know if you recommend things like that.
Yeah, there's Quality Pottery down in Nogales Highway or Highway, or is it Old Nogales Highway?
Well, it's Old Nogales. I've been there. Yep.
Okay, and the other one is Pottery Blowout on Grant and Alvernon.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then there were pottery stores over at Oracle and Miracle Mile.
Okay.
And then I think, who was I forgetting just recently? And all of the nurseries, especially Mesquite Valley, have a large selection of pots. And Savano's on Houghton, South Houghton, has a lot of pots. And, Harlow's has some, Magic Garden has some. But the bigger, the Savano and Mesquite, and I believe Green Things,
Okay.
all have larger selections of pots. And I know Pottery Blowout used to have sales. I believe if you're a member of the Tucson Botanical Gardens, you get a discount if you tell them you're a member there. And you could call Pottery Blowout and ask them when is their next sale. Just assume they still have sales and just ask. And he often will put a sale on when it's a slower season or when he's got a big shipment coming in, because he's bringing them in from overseas.
Okay, thank you.
And the owner of Pottery Blowout is Frank, and you can always say Marylee told me I had to call you.
Okay, thank you.
And there was another one over on Grant near Country Club on the south side, and they were increasing their pottery 3 years ago before I left Tucson. So you can just go on Google and see pottery stores and see which ones are still out there. And there may be in a couple of new ones. There may be some. Well, you don't want to go up to Oro Valley. I don't know of any others in Green Valley. I know David. Is David on? Did David come on?
I don't see him.
Okay. That he always would say that he would go up to Tucson for his pottery.
Yeah, I figured I'd have to do that.
Yeah, and the thing is that being careful about the non-high fired is if you go down to Nogales and stuff, you're going to get really cheap pots, but they're not going to be high fired. And the one way you can get around that, if you wanted to stretch the budget, is use a lawn and leaf heavy duty garbage bag to line the inside of the pot, and make sure you put a drainage hole so that it can drain out through its hole.
Okay.
And then you put your soil and of course your water and everything. And so what you're doing is you've got your pot and you're putting the bag in like you put a liner in a garbage can.
Mm-hmm.
And then instead of draping it over, once you've got it full of soiled stuff, you just cut the length of it and tuck it in. And that will help you if you really want to stretch the budget and go down south from where you are, especially, and see. And you can also, Talavera is fine. That's high glazed as long as they're as long as they're fired and
Yeah.
not painted. But also, if you're not sure, you could always line it up with the lawn and leaf bag.
Okay. No,
I'm sorry.
you see the things at some of the nurseries, they put them in the pot so that you don't have to fill the entire pot with dirt if you've got a really large pot. Are those just kind of a waste of money?
Well, I never used the risers because I used things that were more at hand, and actually they only came out in the last few years. Because you mean the discs that you set down?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. Are they starting to make big enough ones now?
They have some fair sized ones. I think they have 16-inch, and I want to say they have 18-inch.
Okay. So what I used to use, several things. One is to take your lawn and leaf bag and fill it up either with non-biodegradable packing peanuts,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
or if you're ordering a bunch of stuff that comes with foam kind of packing material.
Yeah.
And the reason you put it into a lawn and leaf bag is so that you're containing it and it won't get in your way with your soil and mix with your soil.
Okay.
So, or you could crush up milk containers or soda bottles,
Okay.
water, if you're buying gallons of water, crush them and put them in the bag and fill it that way. The other thing I've done is a 5-gallon nursery can, which a small shrub would come in.
Mm-hmm.
Those black cans are usually very sturdy. So you could take one of those, flip it over, and put it in the pot, and that would take up a lot of soil room.
Okay, that's a good idea.
And you only want to take up soil room if you're planting shallow-rooted plants.
Yeah.
If you're planting a shrub, a tree, or anything that needs to get its roots down, it's going to be a larger plant, then you wouldn't want to, you really need to use your full volume of soil.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the comments I was going to make is I just remembered Costco last year had some vertical blue pots glazed.
Yes.
And was my first one. I think they were $39.99. They weigh a ton.
Yes.
And then I saw someone who bought like 8 of them and lined 4 on one side of their sidewalk and 4 on the other. It looked like a bunch of soldiers.
Oh. Yeah, that could happen. But yeah, sometimes Costco has either the clay pots that are glazed, or sometimes they've had some lightweight pots. And I've never taken objection to any of the pots I've seen there. So but what you have to do is watch, because they sell out usually pretty quickly.
True.
Because they are so well priced.
True.
Okay, anything else on pots?
Good for me.
That's it for me.
All right, it sounds like we only have the 2 of you, but that's good. We have a good time. So mute your mics again, and I'm going back to the screen. Okay, so now we're going into selecting plants. And we're basically, because I plant so much of color, I'm using a lot of the bedding, what they call bedding plants, so the floral plants, and then perennials. And so when I talk about these sizes of plants, that's really what I'm talking about, really are flowers. And so we have different sizes that plants come in. The 2-inch, as you see represented by the diagram there, those are usually herbs, and 2 and 3 inch are usually what your herbs come in. And that's fine. You know, for those purposes, they're fine. They're usually well grown, and and you don't have to worry about them too much. Typically, bedding plants have come in a 4-inch container. Now the growers are changing that up a little bit. They're growing what they call specialty plants in a quart-sized container. Sometimes there may be a flat, and they're closer to a 3-inch cube, and there's like 18 or 24 of them in a flat where that plastic is all joined. And so, but that's in the 4-inch range. A 5-inch or a quart, 5 to 6 inch or a quart, kind of container is the next size up, and then a gallon is the next size up. Now, typically, your 2, 3, 4, and 5 is a single plant planted or growing in the container. And the growers usually have starts that they have begun from seed, and then they transplant them individually into these size containers. Now, your gallon, when we're talking about flowers and annuals, then your gallon pot, you want to look at them, because often, especially in the beginning of the season, there will be 3 what were from a jumbo pack size. So down below is a 6-pack. So in that gallon will be 3 of those smaller plants. And they've just, once they have started growing, they've put them in there. And I believe that they can sell them at a higher profit margin. But sometimes you'll see, no, it's a single plant that's just a larger plant that they've grown further, and they're selling in the gallon. Your quart-sized containers are usually also a single plant. So when, especially like I said, at the beginning of the season, when you go to the nursery, what I'm saying is I recommend only buying in 4-inch and above. And in your gallon, you want to see, are they well enough established to buy them in the gallon form, or are they so individualized and you don't see any roots coming out of the bottom of that gallon canister? I'd rather buy the 4-inch, because they're going to be a stronger plant. If a 4-inch to, no, I'm sorry, a 6-pack to a 4-inch is usually about 6 weeks of growth that you've got on the plant. And so when you're planting, you want to plant the strongest plant you can, because it's going into, even in the winter, we could turn around in the next few days and go back up into the 90s and above 60 at night. And so you want the strongest plants that you can go put in to start off in a new pot. If you plant the 6-packs, which I only recommend on certain exceptions, and I'll tell you in a moment, but those are very young. They have very small root balls because they're limited by the size of that cube, and that they're going to take a while to get established. And if all of a sudden we get a hot day, that heat is going to be pressing down on their upper foliage as well as the soil. It's going to be hot, and they're not going to be able to get a good start. Not as a good of a start if they have more roots and more volume that those roots were growing in. So that's why I say size does matter, that you really want to think about, what do I see in this plant? And is it a full gallon single plant, or are there 3 in there, and where's my money better spent? So they're notorious for doing that with snapdragons. You'll see, and I think stock, but especially snapdragons, there'll be 3 individual little 4-inch or little jumbo pack plants in that gallon. And to me, it's not worth it, because if you pull that out, it's going to fall apart, and you're ending up planting like you had jumbo packs. And so you want to really pay attention to the size of the container and then the health of the plant. What I was going to say about exceptions is that sometimes they'll have, especially in the winter, alyssum and lobelia in the jumbo packs or 6-packs. And if they are well rooted, and which we'll cover in a moment, and if the top of the plant is well grown, then that's an exception that I would say go ahead. But if they're not well grown on the top, sometimes the nurseries where they're selling the plants, they come in and either they're not checking or they're not vigilant about choosing if they're accepting the plants or not. They've come from the growers and they've really gotten the roots to try to start growing well, but the top hasn't had a chance to grow. So you've got very little foliage up there and maybe some blossoms. And that is just not worth your money to risk it. Now, the other one thing I'll tell you, especially with pansies, if you pick up that 4-inch can and you just shake it a little bit, if that plant is wiggly, find another one, because that means the stem is not healthy and it's a risk. I'm not saying it's bad, it's a risk. And I would prefer one that has a strong stem. Because you know how you plant a tree and they say to tie the tree loosely so it has room to sway? That's so that it strengthens its trunk. Now, I don't know exactly how the scientific aspect of annuals is, but I just feel like a weak stem means that it can't get the nutrients up as easily and as healthy as a strong stem. And so it shouldn't wiggle in the container. And it's with pansies that I've seen that the most. So just be aware of that. So then we get into rooting. Now these are gallon-sized plants, okay? And so you want to check your roots. You want, like the picture on the left, you want a nice, healthy, bright white or just cream color root system. You want to see plenty of roots going on. And often just by looking at the bottom of the can, you'll see some roots coming out, which is good. You can also very gently ease the plant out of the pot to look at the roots and make sure that you see a root system. If I didn't see, if this was all blank and it meant all the roots were inside, that means they're still pretty young. And I wish I had a whiteboard here, but I think there's a way I could do this eventually. But if you think about that 6-pack plant was put into this larger can to grow, and here's all the roots. And so if you had this much soil that's out here, but the roots aren't showing on this part, then that means those roots haven't had the time to expand to get out to the rest of the soil. So it's still pretty young. And again, you want a more mature plant, you want a more mature root system. Now the plant on the right, that's an aloe. So having that many roots is really not a problem because they grow very easily. But if my snapdragons or pansies or petunias had this amount of root, that means they've been in that pot a really long time. And I'd be a little bit concerned if they're going to transplant that well, because we'd be ripping them out of their old home and going into a new one. And I consider annuals a little more fragile than an aloe. And so if there was a choice, I would go find a group of plants that are a little younger than this one. Now you can reduce a root volume by 1/3 and not damage the plant. So this could certainly, this part of the root could be cut off, and you can open these roots to open them up to encourage them to reach out again. And so that is possible, but on your annuals, I'd rather see a root system here. Like even down here, there's quite a bit of roots, but it's not root bound. And you know, you can break those apart and then they will find new growth coming out. And so this is the direction you want to head towards, rather than this and rather than less than this. So then also you want to think about your sun versus your shade. So obviously, I hope that we want to learn which plants go in the sun and which go in the shade and which can kind of cross that line between the two. And so in the summer, a coneflower echinacea is great for full sun. And here, this actually, I'm not going to blame this planter on anyone, because this was probably out of the Northwest or something like that. But it just is a good example for what we would look at. So here, a caladium is a summer for the desert, a summer annual shade. And here we have dreamland zinnias, which are full sun summer. And then down here, I think it's probably related to Creeping Jenny, but it's a shade and perennial shade trailer. And this is a Swedish ivy, which would be a summer shade trailer. And this is related to our Wandering Jew, which is full sun. That variety probably is in full sun, but our Wandering Jew is full sun. And so it's just an example of a planting that wouldn't work in the desert because it's just not the right kind of mix for a summer in the desert. And it takes time to learn what plants go in the sun and the shade, but if you go to the local nurseries, they will have them placed in the areas where they can grow. Now, I believe Mesquite has taken all of their annuals into their big shade nursery, just I think to give them a little better chance on starting. And so you have to like pay attention and talk to the staff. Okay, which area is definitely for my shade color and which is my sun color. But the other nurseries and even Home Depot and Lowe's, they'll have them in full sun, even inside where the sun comes through, and then other places where there's shade over the openings. And you can tell what goes in sun and shade. If you are in the big box stores and looking at the plants, don't believe their tags unless it's a Arizona nursery, which you don't always know. Then their tags may be labeled for California, not for Arizona. And you'll see things like if they said on this caladium, if they said full sun, then you know, okay, that's not right because Marylee said they go in the shade or in part shade in the summer. And so that's where you want to talk to your nursery people, and you can learn by just going to the nurseries and take notes, take pictures. And also in my book, I have them designated as far as what's sun and shade, and I'm going to be doing more of that for people so that you have the best success you can have on the first try, not the second, fourth, 10th, whatever.
This is the
So,
image you're going to want for the next section. I realized
you
I
want
had
to
the wrong image in place, and so
think
you'll have
about
to bear
similar
with me
watering
because I
needs.
don't know how to
And
just
so
replace
like
the
if we were to
image.
think, well, I've seen it done, I've probably done some things like this, but where you put a succulent or cactus in with pansies. So there's two opposite ends of the spectrum because pansies love water and succulents, of course, don't love water. So something's going to lose that battle. Now, and there's also differences within your annuals, like snapdragons and geraniums, which you may know, and even petunias. They don't like to be super wet. Lavender doesn't want to be super wet. So it's better to plant them in pots together and to have the higher water plants, your zinnias in the summer, your pansies in the winter, maybe in a different pot. But there's ways you can get around it. And that's by, if you know your root ball, and if you keep the snapdragons a little bit higher, so it gets a little more air around that root ball. You don't bury that root ball at all. Keep it up a little higher. That gives it a little more time to dry out. And also being on the outside of the pot because it's a tall plant. So if we put it on the back of the pot, it's going to have more air back there than if it's in the center. And so you can think of ways to cheat a little bit. Geraniums aren't going to be as forgiving because they really don't want to be overly wet. They're not succulents and not drought tolerant by any means, but in the world of annuals, they don't use as much. So that's another thing that you'll learn by doing, learn by asking. And if you look again at the tags in the nurseries, and if there is a relevance, they will say, you know, low water, or some of the perennials will say drought tolerant. And so you'll see. And then when you plant them, we'll talk about this later, but if you're mindful, then you will learn what your plants tell you that they need. Okay? So I think that that's the end of this section. So let's stop the share. And we have questions on selecting plants. How's our time?
Well, this is Carolyn, and I think that this is the area that I'm least confident in. I mean, I know not to put a cactus with a begonia, But when it starts moving into some of the annuals and things like that, I'm not real certain. So is it trial and error?
Well, like I said, okay, so what is your biggest concern, sun and shade or water?
Water.
Okay. And we're going into winter now. So your winter annuals that need the lesser water would be your snaps, your kale, and your geraniums.
Okay.
Okay. And like I said, I don't think in winter it's as much of an issue because you're not having to water the pots as heavily. And so, so yes, trial and error, but see, you don't have to get all the way to making an error if you are mindful. And if you see that your plants are representing that they're getting too much water, you could even, are you hand watering or irrigation?
The big pot that I just planted is on a drip.
Okay, they're on pot line, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you could always, if something seems to be getting too much water, you could move the emitters a little bit away from it.
Mm-hmm.
If the whole pot is too wet, then you can lessen your watering time.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise you could move the emitters off so that maybe the back of the pot or wherever those plants are, they're getting overwatered, can dry out a little bit more. But I bet the first adjustment to make would be lessening or increasing, changing the duration of the watering.
Okay.
And then secondly, check on, once the plants are established, check to see, are they, do they need, at what point do they not need everyday watering anymore? And if you just change, what you want to become friends with your timer. You don't want to leave it up to the installer or your landscaper. And the way that I talk about your irrigation system is get a lesson on it, write it down, and no matter what you think you know, go out every day and practice and make adjustments and learn how to change the frequency, learn how to change the duration, and write it down and go out every day and practice. And then when you put it back to where it belongs, close the door, open it, make sure it's where it belongs, and shut the door. And then you will gain confidence. Learn how to run it manually, because you want to run it manually so you can go and check it while it's running. And that's one way to know, well, gee, this pot is getting soaking wet while the irrigation's on. I need to make a change, or I need to have my person make a change to it. And so you really want to learn. And it's not like, it's like computers. You can't learn it all in a day. You need to take it one step at a time and see what you have going on. And also, depending on your timer, I might be able to help you. And the best thing is, if you took a picture of your timer and sent it to me, then at least I'd know if I know it and if I can help. And who did you have put in your pot line?
It's my husband. He's run all of the lines. And he's the one who's like the genetic gardener in the family.
Oh, okay. But is he, but what lines did he run it off of?
Good question. I need to go look. Well, that's a very good question. And since I don't know the answer, I need to learn it.
Because the question to ask him is, honey, are my pots on their own valve?
Okay.
Because, okay, I just got a message from my Wi-Fi, but let me know if anything seems like it's hanging up. Yeah, am I on, and if not, how often are they running? I'd want to know what the emitters are. So maybe you could take some pictures for me and send them to me. And what are the emitters, and how long does it run, and how often does it run?
Okay.
Those are all your questions. And because if my concern is always, if they're not on their own pot line, then what are they running? Because if they're running like shrubs, then the pots are getting too much water when it's watering and often too long in between. But did you have summer pots on the irrigation line?
We're not here during the summer, so what I did this year is I just pulled all the plants out of the pots and left dirt.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so find that out so you know, and send me some information because I'm curious.
I'm sorry?
Send me some information because I'm curious.
Okay,
Okay?
will do.
So I have a question. This is Gay.
Yes.
So you can run because the house where we bought, she had a lot of pots, and so she has lines that go where she used to have the pots. So those can be then, you're not talking are you talking a separate zone for those?
It's a separate valve. So yes, a separate zone. Because they need to be set much differently than your landscape plants.
Okay. Okay. Because right now I don't know the answer to that, but I can ask the guy. He just put in a new timer, an orbit.
Uh-huh.
And he went through it with me, and it was like, okay, I can understand this, and it's big enough print that I can actually read it without my glasses. So
Good.
but so it needs to be, because everything in my yard is on one zone. So you're saying that the pots should be on a separate zone?
A separate, well, to me, it's a separate valve.
Okay.
And because, okay, usually, let's say if you have trees, do you have trees?
Yeah.
Okay. But you said everything is on the same. So what else in your yard do you have? You have trees, shrubs?
Trees and shrubs. We have lantana. I have rosemary. We have a lot of cactus. I've got bottle brush, some native grasses, a little bit of everything.
Okay.
I have Cape honeysuckle.
Okay.
And
So the cactus should not be on irrigation.
Okay.
And the shrubs, often they will put shrubs and trees on the same line. And the same line means that they will get the same amount of water no matter what plant it is. So in the summer, typically you're running 90 minutes to 2 hours every 4 to 5 days.
Okay.
In the winter, they usually, depending on what's actively growing, then they may go out to the same length of time, but go out to every week or every 10 days, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Pots with flowers need daily, and in the winter, when they're mature, every other day water if they're in full sun. And the duration, remember I said 90 minutes to 2 hours?
Uh-huh.
The duration is anywhere from 4 to 7 minutes.
Okay.
And it depends on what kind of emitter, but still, they never need an hour of water.
No, I wouldn't think so.
So that's what you need to find out. So the same thing I was saying to Carolyn, you need to find out how much water and how are the pots getting water. And this is going into a whole nother area than we're covering today. But I just don't want you to get frustrated with your pots because of however they're being watered. And so really, if you were hand watering a pot, and it's a 24 inch pot, you're probably giving it somewhere around a gallon of water. So if they've got emitters on there that are half gallon an hour, okay, the math would be right, but then what kind of emitter is there? Because if you have drip emitters, water follows the path to least resistance, and it's not wetting the entire soil. So one of the things, if you're already planted and your system's been running, you could go out and see, is your whole pot damp, or is it damp in areas? And it would be probably a good thing to pick up, if you don't have one, just a water meter from the hardware store or Walmart or wherever, so that you can actually stick the meter in different places and see where the emitters are. and stick it in where the emitters aren't and see if it's, well, how wet is it? Because it really should be just above medium in its wetness. It shouldn't be like over the top, and it shouldn't be dry.
Okay.
And it should be consistent. So, everybody needs to do a little research.
Yeah, sounds like a whole different way of approaching, because in Colorado in the summer, I just hand watered my pots.
Right.
But this is a little hotter in the summer, but I had planned on hand watering them. I didn't know if I was going to use the emitters or not. So
Right. Right. And you know, are you going back to Colorado in the summer, or are you here for good?
Here full time.
Okay. So, so yeah, if you want to have the flowers, you're going to have to make sure about how they're getting watered, and that they're not getting overwatered if they're on a tree line and a shrub line.
Okay. Okay.
So, and I think what I need to do is a checklist for, I think maybe you two can help me with, as we move forward, with what kind of resource would be the easiest for you. And I'm thinking some kind of a checklist to go out and look at an irrigation system.
Yeah, so you know what you're looking at. I mean, I can go look at it, but unless I kind of have guidelines.
Right. And like there's so many different controllers, and I don't know them all, and they've come out with new ones since I don't use one anymore. I also worked a lot with Tolson Irrigation in Tucson, and so he is my resource.
Uh-huh.
And he comes out, I'm not selling him at this moment, but he installed all of my pot lines for my clients. And I think that also on the internet we can figure things out on a specific system, but I can help you with the guidelines as far as what you need to be looking for.
Okay.
And some of it is just to see if you've already got things planted, how are they doing? You know, because if we don't need to fix something that's not broken, but also, are you also wasting water? You know, that would be a concern.
Yeah.
So water bill.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And one thing to do too, do either of you have pools?
No.
I do.
Okay, so you know your water bill, and to look at and you probably got from whoever you bought your houses from have history of water bill, or you can get them from the water company, and you can see if there's any major changes. And also talk to your neighbors who have a similar type house and landscaping to you, and ask them, could you compare notes on water bills?
Mhm.
And because the more you know, the better you're going to be able to control your water usage and your bills, and also the health of your plants.
Well, it's even more critical now that they've put the digital meters in, because almost everyone is reporting that their bill has doubled and tripled.
And since when?
They changed out the old mechanical water meters for digitals.
Oh.
And according to my husband, the difference is the digitals literally did not measure every drop, but the new digital ones, if your ice maker comes on in your house and fills the water, it tracks that.
Gotcha. And I'm trying to remember if one of my friends, if he was TEP or if he was water. I think he was TEP. But he knows a lot about water, so I can always find out anything about that kind of thing from him too. All right, so so there's a lot. I know that there's a lot to learn on plants and things, and my plan. Carolyn knows about this, Gabe, but I'm planning to start towards the end of the year a subscription program for my newsletter, The Potted View, which will be a very low-cost paid subscription. And in that, I'm going to be getting much more into detail about how to succeed in your desert container gardening. So that will be coming. And I'm starting to talk a little bit about it now, and it's all the logistics of creating computer system and all of that I have to do before I can really make it go. And, you know, everything when you're working with web designers and people outside of your own control, it always takes a little bit. But I'd hoped for this month, and that's not going to happen. So I'm saying it'd be nice to have it for Christmas, but if not, it'll be January.
And you'll be sending out information on that.
Yeah, and you're definitely on my email list, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So you'll be seeing little teasers and announcements and things, and I'm getting more ideas about maybe some different levels that people can buy in at. But I can tell you right now that I think that the annual cost for the basic information of good, solid, strong information is only going to be about $60 a year. So
Okay.
it's not going to be a lot of money.
Great.
So, all right, let's move on. Let's close the mics, and I'll go back to the screen share. Okay, we're going to get now into materials and our what we need to have to be prepared to start planting and to actually plant. So we want to make sure there's a hole in any pot we're planting in. And some of the newfangled pots are even having little holes that are more on the bottom side of the pot, right on that edging. Standard is usually a hole in the center. Sometimes on larger pots there'll be several holes in a circle outside of the center, and you just want to make sure you've got holes. I mentioned before the propylene pots don't come with holes, and there you could take a nail and hammer a circle of holes and punch out the hole really easily. If you're at a nursery or pottery store, double check that the pots have their holes, because sometimes they've just come through the creators of the pots, and you'll see even a ridge where the hole should have been, but it wasn't punched out, and they will have the drills that they can make the holes for. You don't want to take the pot home without the hole. If they do it, then it's their risk. There are ways to do it at home, but I'd rather have you do it at the store. And sometimes especially a larger pot, the base, the bottom of the inside of the pot has become concave, and so the drainage would all go to the edges. And if you see that, if it's significant, ask them to give you a couple holes down in that lower section, because otherwise you could have an inch of water down in there that's sitting, and you really don't want that. And the good pottery stores, they won't have any problem doing that. That won't happen at your big box stores. So drainage. Then you want to think about how to get the pot up off the ground. The reason you want that is for air circulation. And even, you know, you think, well, it's only a little hole. Well, that little hole gets some air going in there. And so somehow you want to raise it above the patio or the rock or whatever you're on. So here's some ideas. You can put it up on pot feet, and then it has free run right through the hole down onto the ground or the patio. You can use pot stands. Often chimenea stands fit a lot of the size pots that you'd be buying. You could actually, if you say, well, I really want saucers, you could actually put a saucer on top of the feet. And no, sorry, this is the pot. The black is the pot. The pot goes on the feet, and the feet fit in the saucer. So you need a larger saucer to do this, but it can still work. Now you can use things like broken flagstone, pieces of brick. I even bought some of those little tiles that you can get in the hardware stores, you know, Home Depot, whatever. And I would use the little tiles to raise it, and I put them in under the pot so that they actually didn't show, so it kind of looks like it's floating. They also have some really strong, nice, heavy-duty plastic pot feet, and some that also go in under so you don't actually see them. In a very pretty pot like this blue pot that's over here on the right, they have some ceramic matching blue or whatever color feet, and they're big feet, but it's part of the display then. And so you can use anything that gets it off the ground so that you get the air circulation going. Now here, this pot is placed directly on the rock. So what we've done is we've dug a hole under the drainage hole of the pot so that the air can circulate in that hole underneath this pot. And the other thing that doing that does is if there was shrubbery around this pot anywhere, those roots are going to try to get to the water that's happening with this pot. And if the pot was directly on the ground, on the rock, then those roots would actually grow up into the pot. And so to try to prevent that as much as possible, if you create a cavern under here, then it's not going to be as easy for them to grow up into the pot. So that's a way of solving that on the rock. And then, cleaning. And so what I found through trial and error was that having the pot up off the patio, up on feet or a stand without a saucer was the cleanest situation I could create. Now what I did do was every week I would go out and with my jet spray on the hose, I would hose it off so that I didn't start getting calcium buildup out there. If you just let it flow and let it be there, you're going to get calcium buildup, and it's almost impossible to remove. So you want to be able to go out with a hose. The problem with putting anything on a saucer, first your dust and debris and everything collects underneath it. And if you have any overrun, you're still going to get this calcium buildup, and it ends up becoming a big mess. If you're in a shady area there, then you start growing some algae in the saucer, around the saucer, anything like that. And so even if you are traveling and you have someone watching over your property, maybe one of their jobs could be to take a hose once a week and just jet off the area under the pots and get them cleaned out. Because also, just because there's water there, bugs get in there and things. The danger of having the saucer in the summer is it breeds mosquitoes. And so you have to get out there with your hose anyhow to jet that saucer out often. And so I just found it's easier and better to have them up off the ground some way or another. And then the materials you need for planting. You need some quality pottery soil or potting soil. What I always have suggested is the black gold general purpose soil, and it's wonderful soil and I could trust it. But now, in the last 10 years probably, the nurseries have been getting their own soil that works well with the high pH water and works well with our plantings and the sun. And so you can talk with if you have a favorite local nursery, you could talk with them, see what they're selling. You can price compare to black gold. They'll probably carry black gold too. And the way you know it's good for planting in pots is, first of all, it's really not soil. There's no dirt involved. It's made out of peat moss and organic products, and usually has some perlite in it. And so it's a nice, rich smelling, somewhat moist but not clumping, the consistency is very consistent. And so there's not particles in it of other things. And that's what you want. If you're looking, and if you go to a big box store and they have their own brand, or they'll have some of the name brands too, and like Miracle Grow and Phillips and different kinds of brands, and they're selling it now with fertilizer inside, and you just end up paying a premium for that. And so I like getting one without the fertilizer in it that's just nice and rich. And anyhow, they'll have a bag that happens to be torn, so you'll be able to touch and feel it. And if it's really dry or has a lot of twiggy stuff in it, that's not composted enough, and so you want to stay away from it. Then you want something that is going to go over that hole that's in the pot. And what I found the best thing to use was, because it's so long living, is some screening. So if you have some old screening, you don't want metallic, you want the nylon, with some screening around. Or if you go to like Ace Hardware, and find out when they do their screens and ask that you come in that day and get some scraps from them. Or you can just go and buy a small roll of replacement screening if you're going to do a lot of pots, and cut, you know, a 4x4 out to cover all of the holes, each hole, if you need a larger piece or whatever. This lasts the longest. You don't use pot shards. You use something like this because you want it to filter the water that's going out, to keep the soil in the pot. And pot shards and rocks, eventually the water will find its way through them and it will carry soil and food with it. And so it's really not going to do anything but make your pot heavier. So you want something that's going to filter that water. For years I used coffee filters, and I would fold them actually in quarters so that they would last longer actually, but they will decompose through time, and then you're going to have to replace them. So the screening lasts the longest. You could also use, if you still wear any kind of hose, you could put some pieces of pantyhose or stockings in there. And I've also had some people tell me that they've used old sponges, old scrunchies, that those I'm afraid would collect too much and wouldn't filter the water. And so I keep going back to the screening for it. And the coffee filters, especially if you know you're replacing the soil every year, then you could definitely use coffee filters. They're handy, that's for sure. Then you want, every time you plant a pot, you want a time-release fertilizer. And Osmocote is a recognized brand name, but I'm not saying that's what you need. All of the stores have their own brand, and you'll also probably see Osmocote. But every time you plant, you want to use some fertilizer. And what I like to do is also mix some organic fertilizer in with my time release so that I'm using some of both. And this just has some nutrients in it that the time release often doesn't have. And it too will feed the plant over time. It's not an immediate impact. And so you use this mix, or at least the time release, every time you repot a pot, okay? Not in between plantings, but every time you repot. Then if you're going to be doing any kind of cactus or succulents, you want to have some rocks that you will use on top of the soil to dress the pot. They help retain moisture. They also disperse the water quickly away from the stem that's coming out of the soil, so that you don't have so much of a risk of root rot. And so that's something very important to have for your cactus. It also makes them look better. Cactus and succulents. You don't use anything like this or even mulch on a pot like what I recommend we're planting, because well, first the rocks would get in the way, and if you use mulch or things, that also is getting in the way. It's not going to decompose over 6 months, and so as you replant it, it's really not ready to be part of the soil, and so it just mixes up. And its purpose is to help maintain moisture. But as your plants grow, their shade that they put over the soil is going to keep the moisture in. So you don't need to add anything. Now, if you had a single tree, say, in a pot, then you could use some mulch to help keep the moisture in. But not when you're doing perennials and annuals and a combination planting. And then water. And if you've done anything with me before, you've heard me say this time and time again, 95% of plant failure is due to inappropriate watering. Too much, too little. And you see this man definitely in an office, and he probably was supposed to water when I'm going to be like, call me sexist, but when his secretary had gone on vacation and he couldn't handle the watering. And you see it's dripping out and splashing on the ground here, and that poor tree is a goner. So this obviously was too little watering, but also we can have way too much watering. And that happens especially in shade pots and indoor plants. And so what I recommend there is, for those situations, that you get a water meter so you really know when to water. And typically your shade, even in the summer, is every 3 or 4 days if it's heavy shade. and or even up to 5 days in the winter. You know, you could be watering maybe once a week. And your houseplants, you know, I was of the school, you water every week and you water every week and you water every week. And then I got those little gnats, and my exterminator said, well, you're got too much water, and so they're breeding in your pots. And so she helped me by treating them, get rid of the gnats. But I worked on how often did I need to water, and I ended up watering every 3 weeks. Now there are some house plants that may react to that treatment, especially like a peace lily, because they're more aquatic plants. But you could possibly train them to be good on that. But again, a water meter will help. And if it's not over towards half, like if you think about, let's see, from your perspective, if this is wet and this is dry, so we got a medium point. So to water a shade or house plant, you want it just beyond, over towards dry, just beyond medium before you water. And your cactus and succulents, you want it almost dry, anywhere in here, before you water. And your sun plants, you don't want them really to get past that midpoint. And no, you don't have to like stay up all afternoon with them and checking them, but you get an idea of where they are, and they start to wilt and that they need their water. So pay attention to watering. All right, this is just on materials now, so we'll stop there. And questions?
Yeah, I have a question about, because what I have right now is I have pots, and I have not planted anything in them yet. And so what I'm hearing is, and I had them on the rocks, and I thought that would work, but what you said makes good sense about the circulation. So I can get some of those little plant feet, like the terracotta ones, or
They're on the rock. Well, you could dig a hole underneath a drainage hole. So it's just like a 4-inch by 2-inch hole.
okay.
That would be the easiest thing. The problem with feet or bricks on rocks is that the ground will shift, and you could end up with your pot never level.
Ah,
So
okay.
it just won't look good. So I would go out and just take a little trowel out and see if you can are the pots empty at this point?
No, they have dirt in them, but I can move them.
Yeah, because if you can and even if somebody could just come and tilt them,
Yeah.
or you tilt them, whoever wants to tilt and somebody dig, and you can get the rocks out from underneath and dig a little hole, and you should be good. And actually, if you actually took a can of water out with you and put water in that area, it'd be easier to dig.
You mean just soften it?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the easiest thing to do in the rocks, and that because, yeah, I've tried using bricks and stands and feet and everything, and they always end up crooked.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just clear the rocks away underneath it and just dig a little 2-inch, 4-inch hole.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Just wherever the hole, the potting hole is,
Great.
you know, where it's going to fall, so that the drainage goes into the hole.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm okay on this section.
Okay, good. All right, then we'll move on again. Okay, so so the basic tips for planting, and you're going to be watching a video in a moment, and is to pack in your soil as you're adding your soil to your pot. You want to keep packing it down so that you get out any air pockets. You want to add your soil to the same height of where you put your plant in. So you want to come up so that you have it right to put the plant down into the hole. And what I said before, fertilize with the organic and the time release fertilizer every time you replant. And then when you're done planting, you water in well, which means the entire volume of soil will be moist. And the way you know that is that it will drain out of the hole. And if you want to, especially in that first planting, you want to be very um, very soft, gentle in your watering. And so that you're getting the water all around the pot and it's all going down and you're just taking it nice and easy with that. You can do that with a hose, with a shower setting, maybe a little bit, turn it down a little bit, or with a watering can with a shower nozzle on the watering can. I think they call them a rose nozzle.
Now I'm going to
So-
show you a live planting demonstration, previously recorded, of course, and it's in
Hi
a
there.
hanging
Today we're
basket,
going
but
to
all
cut
of the
out a
techniques
big
that I
hanging
use
basket.
are
This is
applicable
about
to
17
a
inches. I've
pot.
already put in
So
some
we'll go
wonderful
right into
potting
that
soil.
in just a
You know
moment.
it's good soil because it's dark and rich and it smells good. It doesn't smell like manure. You want to fill it up to about 2 inches of the top of the pot and tamp it down some to get the air pockets out. And then you're going to take good old grandma's handful measurement of time-release fertilizer and just sprinkle it around, kind of fluff it in a little bit, but you don't have to worry about mixing it because it'll mix as we plant the plants. Today I'm going to do a combination flower and veggie herb pot and to hang out on our patio. So I have an orange tomato here. I've never put this size tomato in one of these kinds of pots, but why not try? That's what gardeners do, right? So I'm going to kind of put this 2/3 away from me so that I have room for my flowers on the other side. And I open it up from the can and then put it in. Now let me show you how I did that. Here's an oregano. And so when you do the plant out of the can, you squeeze it. You do not pull it out by its stems because you'll break it. You pull it out and then you open up the roots, and I like to do 4 thumbs. One this way and then one this way. And then you dig a hole for your plant, moving some of the soil aside, and then you place it in, push it down, and then bring the soil back in around it, making sure that you don't cover the roots any further than they were in the original can. Next I have some osteos, as I call them. They're osteospermums or African daisies. You see the beautiful flower there. And yellow is the theme for today with my orange tomatoes that will come out. And that will be over on the more front side here, because I have a sunny side of the patio and a shady side. So my flowers will be on the sunny side, and my tomato, and then my I have a coleus, and that will be on my shady side. So I have another osteo, and that's going to go in the back here. I can rotate around and show you where I'm putting it. So once again, I open up the roots. This is pretty loosely packed, so I don't have to pull them apart so much. If it had a lot of roots, you could always tickle them out of there. And then you dig a hole, put it in, push it down, bring in your soil around it. So, and then my last plant, which will be on the shady side, is a coleus. Same thing. I've got a small container here, really flimsy, but I'm pushing it out so I don't pull it. And I think I have an extra prize in there of a little worm. Well, he's going to help my pot. And then I'm going to dig a nice little hole there, put that in, push it in really well. Now, since this is a hanging basket, I'm not going to water it right now. I'm going to get it hung and then water it, because I can't imagine trying to lift this baby up when I've got to all of the wet soil in there. So everything's nicely pushed down. I have fertilized it, and we're ready to go. Have a good day. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, so the biggest thing, I said 95% of the problems with our pots in the desert especially is watering. And so we need to be mindful. And the way one of the first things you can do is enjoy your garden by being mindful. Go out in the morning before it gets hot, or a little bit after in the winter when it's cold. Go in a part of the day you enjoy and walk your pots and look at them. And while you're there, you could do a little deadheading, but if you don't have time or you just don't feel like it, just go and take your cup of tea or your coffee, or later your glass of wine or whatever you want, and water. Be hydrated in the desert. And go out and just see, how are they doing? Is something wilting? Is something like, are there puddles of water? Or is a pot full of water? You know, all of the different kinds of things that can happen, especially if we're on irrigation. But just, are they growing? Do we see new growth? Do we see new buds? You know, are there bugs, et cetera, et cetera. So be mindful about your pots. And I always say in my classes, don't plant when you're leaving on vacation. You want to allow at least 2 weeks before you leave and trust it in somebody else's hands to just make sure everything takes. And so those first 2 weeks, you should start seeing some new growth and happy plants. And just make sure that that's happening before you make any changes in how mindful you're being. And also, you know, talk to the plants and touch the plants and be with them, because people have found that they will grow better. I have a friend who doesn't garden, kills everything, hates it, and her mother, who should have known better, gave her a hanging herb basket, and she said, put it in your kitchen, it'll be fine, and just water it once a week and it'll be fine. And so it turns out that her kitchen, and she was like, she dared that plant to live. And she's like, okay, I'm talking to you now. This is the last time I'm talking to you, and you're on your own now. Well, the plant ended up being in the kitchen, which was right adjacent to the family room. And they tend to leave the TV on all the time. And that plant thrived. And so all she can figure out was that the plant liked the human voice of the TV just as much as hers, if maybe more. So she did really well. So the next thing is fertilizing. Your plants are in pots, which give them no other place to go for food. And we're watering so often that we are losing some of the food out through the drainage of the water. So you want to do a water-soluble fertilizer every 2 weeks after you've planted. Once you see new growth happening, that's when you would start your fertilizing, and it's every 2 weeks. So you would use some kind of water-soluble fertilizer. This is an old-fashioned one, but I like a hose applicator style, because this just makes life easier, and it allows you to foliar feed as well as soil feed. And so you would put a packet of the food into the canister, and then you would hook it up to your hose and take it on to your pots. And one package of food I've found will fertilize about 40 pots, so you can kind of get an idea. Some of them don't come in blue. When it's blue, it's easy, because as long as the water is medium to full blue, then you know you have food in there. Some of the newer ones are white, and so I think it may be by how cloudy it is. But about 40 pots. So if you have 10 pots, you know you could probably water 4 times, which would be, do the math, I said 4 times, right? Yeah. 2 months, and because you're doing it every 2 weeks. And then the third thing, and people don't trust me when I first tell them this, but you want to blast your plants. So again, you wait until you've got new growth going, so about 2 weeks in, and you take your hose with your nozzle and you set it on jet, and you stand about 4 feet away from the plants, and you blast across the plants. And that helps aerate them. It blows bugs off. It helps deter pests of disease, and your plants will be much healthier. This can be done once a week, every day, as often as possible. But especially in the summer and monsoon season, it'd be best if you could do it every day. And in the winter, if you do it a few times a week, or you could still do it every day. Roses, love it. So if you have roses, great to do. You can do your other shrubs and trees and cactus too, it's fine. But you want to make sure you do this, because especially when we're planting a pot really full, it really helps get air moving around in there, and gets those bugs off and things. I don't get into any kind of pest products as far as chemicals and things. This is my first offense, and it really helps with aphids and powdery mildew, anything. So Blasting, well, making sure you got your watering routine, your fertilizing routine, and blasting. Those are key for your potted plants. And don't be afraid, it's not going to make the flowers fall off. If they fall off, they were almost dead anyhow. Then the next thing you want to do on a regular basis is deadheading, where you are taking off the spent flowers. And when you do this, you want to come down and cut it back behind the dead flower to where there's new leaves or new stem or new growth. See, this right here is new growth. So if this is the dead flower underneath the thumb here, then you would cut it down, way down here. And when you think about this, and you think about petunias or pansies, you know, especially petunias, there's this little cup before the flower. Many people just think they just need to take the flower out. No, you need to cut down the stem from the plant. And when you have like pansies, it's a really long stem, or geraniums, it's a really long stem. In snapdragons, you want to come way down to where you see new growth when you deadhead, because that helps make a fuller plant. Pruning, the same thing, that now and then you'll want to prune and to shape up a plant. And in other classes, I give lessons on pruning. But if something's out of shape, just cut it back the same way in deadheading down to new growth, but cut it down into the plant so that you're not just cutting at the top, because it will grow from where you pruned it. And then sometimes, you know, people have to know themselves. Are you a rescuer or are you a thrower? I'm a thrower. If something's not going to make it, then it's gone. I figure we spend, you know, anywhere from $25 to hundreds of dollars on cut flowers and arrangements, that if I spend $7 on a plant and it's not making it, I'm going to let it go. I'd rather not spend the time in trying to rescue something. So sometimes throw it away. All right. Okay, now I had a question for you, because I set this up a little differently than Carolyn the other time. When I was talking, could you see me?
Yes, I could.
Excellent. So you saw when I was doing something to show something with my hands or any of that?
Yes.
All right, excellent, thank you. Okay, so we are at the end. And so we have more time for questions.
So I have a question, but you said, how often do you change out the soil in the pots?
Okay, so as many as my answers start with that depends, but basically, you know, a lot of it depends how often on how large the pot is. A smaller pot's going to need it changed out more often than a larger pot. And every time you're replanting a new season, you're putting in new plants, you tend to add soil. And also, if there's like root-laden soil, you're taking that out with the roots. Or if there's any soil that got dried out, you're taking that out. So you're always adding soil. But there comes a time, especially in pots 24 inches or lower, that you do need to replace it. And it's usually somewhere around 2.5 to 3 years. And you will know by, you know how we talked about how the soil is rich and a little bit moist and just nice soil? It will change in its composition, and it will appear more like, almost like desert soil in a way. And often that happens faster when it hasn't been consistently moist. You know, a lot of snowbirds will not irrigate their soil while they're gone in the summer. So it totally dries out, and they're going to have to replace it, because at that point it will not be able to rehydrate itself. And so, but typically if it's a 4-season pot where it's being watered consistently 2.5 to 3 years, we don't want to have to replace the soil in a big pot, like a 28 to 36 inch pot. I mean, that's huge. And so what I do is, like always, if I'm adding new plants, then I'll put new soil in as I'm doing that. And if I feel like the soil is starting to degrade a little bit, then I'll try to take out, especially around the edges, as much as I can. and then put in some new soil, and then try to dig in under the roots and around the roots to try to mix it in a little bit. And as we're watering, it will start mixing in with the lower soil. It's actually the upper soil that gets bad the quickest, because it's drying out more often. You're in a big pot, your lower soil isn't really ever getting a chance to dry out, so it's able to maintain itself and really is composting down there, and so it doesn't get as bad. But when you've got a pot that's only 20 inches by 20 inches, that whole thing is going to be drying out now and then, and it will degrade the soil and need to be replaced in a couple of years. So it's a good question. Everybody asks it.
Yeah. One other question, and I think I misunderstood when you were talking about this. So when you're putting the soil in and you're packing it down before you plant anything to get rid of the air pockets, was I mishearing? You water the soil before you do and see if it will drain, or do you wait?
No, you don't need to water it, because the soil should be damp.
Yeah.
I mean, slightly damp, damp for the desert.
Yeah.
And so no, you don't water it in until after you've planted.
But you water it quite well when you plant it to make sure that the water is coming out the hole.
Yes, and the whole volume of soil has been watered, and then once it comes out the hole, and you'll see that it's probably sinking. Sometimes you may even have to add a little bit more soil because maybe you didn't pack it down enough. But yeah, you just a nice slow water, but not before, just after.
Okay.
And the one thing I'll tell you though is that one thing I didn't say earlier is you want to make sure the plants that you're putting in are not dry. And what I recommend, especially in the summer, is if they're at all dry, and when you take them out of their container, you can see that sometimes even just the top inch is damp, and then you'll see a line, and it's two different colors. And one is darker, the top is darker than the bottom. And so what I do is I put it back in the can, and I will have a pail of water next to me, and I will put the plant down so that the entire can is underwater, and you'll see bubbles coming up, and that's the air coming out where it's getting the water. And I'll hold it underwater until the bubbles stop, and then I'll bring out, let it drain off, and then I'll plant it, because that's how you get the plant to go in wet. And because you don't want it to go in dry, because what's going to encourage it to take up water? Not much. We need the water around that plant to have it take up the water.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
And in the winter, same thing. It just doesn't happen as often as in winter because things aren't drying out as quickly.
Is it a good idea to have a rain gauge so that you can keep up with how much moisture, or do you just treat your pots differently?
I treat the pots differently, and I never assume, because even if like even in monsoon, if you have an inch of rain, if you take that water meter out to your pots, there's a chance that only the top inch of the soil is wet. And but I like having a rain gauge to know really how much did this area of my house get, because if we have a downpour for 10 minutes, which can happen, that's not enough to replace your watering. And that's another thing to watch for if you're using irrigation, because let's say your landscaper's there and you've had some good rain, and he turns off your system and your pots are on it, but they're not getting their daily water. So now what? And so you have to have a good relationship with anybody who may be changing your system, or hubby, to make sure that the pots are getting what they need. And that short, heavy rain is not enough to take. You might be able to not water that day, but you're probably going to need to water the next day.
Okay. And you said earlier when we started that you might talk for a minute about winter and frost protection.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Gay. All right. So basically, anything that is going to freeze back in the winter, you want to protect. And the ways you can do it is anything that's really sensitive you can bring into under a carport, or
next to the house. It's best to have some frost cloths that you can get at any of the nurseries or big box stores, and cut them to size of what you need. You cover the plant, and when talking about your potted plants, you cover the plant around, and then you fold the ends up into the pot around the soil, and you can use rocks to hold it in place. You can use clothespins to pin it together, and what you want to do is, if you hear that there's a freeze warning for tomorrow night or tonight, then that morning you want to make sure the pots are watered, because that creates humidity, which is warmer. And then before sundown, you want to go out and cover the pots, get them all situated, and that will help. It won't guarantee, because it depends on how cold it gets. I wouldn't bother covering things like bougainvillea, because it's going to freeze back anyhow, and covering is just a big pain in the neck. Your young citrus trees, if especially potted, are going to want to be covered. And things like pansies, if it's really going to be cold, they're going to freeze a little bit, but they should rebound. And but you can bring things, if you have like pots out on your patio and you have them on rolling dollies, then you could bring them back close to the house. Any place where they get some added protection is going to help. But you also have to know which plants need to be covered, what plants you don't want to lose regardless of what happens, so then you would need to prepare to bring them inside or into a garage. And what your risk level is, what your tolerance is, kind of like investments. So if you have an adenium that you love and there's no way you want to lose it, then you want to have a way of bringing it indoors. And so then in the morning, after the freeze warning and everything, in the morning, if it's a normal desert day, the sun's coming out and the earth is warming up again, and then you want to take the frost cloths off. If you have another freeze warning that night, you want to put them back on. You can go a day without removing them. If you know you're going to have 2 in a row, then you could get away with not removing them. But you just, you don't want them to go too long. When we had the big freeze 12, 15 years ago, we never got up above freezing during the day, which was unheard of in the 100 years of them tracking temperatures in the Tucson area. And so we never removed anything, but also so many plants were lost. And then if you have cactus and succulents, everything is pretty much tender except for the yucca family. And if you have columnar cactus, if you just get styrofoam cups, you can cover the stems, because that's what you want to protect, the tips. Or you could take newspaper and wad it up and go around the tip, and then put a plastic grocery bag over it and tie it to keep the newspaper on. You don't want the plastic to touch the cactus though. Okay. So you don't use blankets or towels, because if it rains or there's any moisture, it's going to get really heavy. And so you can use sheets. And yeah, mostly sheets you could use. Don't use any kind of plastic, because that will burn when it gets so cold. And they've gotten so many frost cloths out available now that, and when you cut them, label which pot it fits. If you can number your pots and have a little map, and then cut your cloth and use a Sharpie and mark what number it is, so that it just makes it faster. And living 20 years in the desert, I kind of got to the point where, okay, guys, survival of the fittest. I'm not doing this anymore, and so whatever lives. And I had to be willing to give up some things. But after the big freeze, I lost so much anyhow. It was like, okay, I'm only planting what's going to survive, because I'm not doing this again.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. If I think of anything else, I'll let you know, but that's the basics. And the biggest thing is that the flowering plants go to bed for a freeze wet. The cactus and succulents go to bed dry,
because you don't want them to suck water up into their stems, because then that will freeze, which will kill the plant. But your flowering plants, your shrubs, your trees, all of that, it's best if they go into a freeze wet.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else for you, Carolyn?
Well, I was just thinking, we have a lot of columnar cactus in our backyard, and so we have a collection of styrofoam cups that we've gotten over the years, and going to Baggins and getting their large size drink works real well. And my husband calls them cactus condoms.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, one year there had been a run on getting the cups, and so there weren't any around, and we went into I don't know, 7-Eleven or something, and just asked if we could just buy some cups. The only way you could buy them is if you bought a Slurpee. And we're like, well, I need 20. I'm not buying 20 Slurpees. So that's actually when I came up with the newspaper and bag thing. And it's a little bit harder because the thorns can attach and stuff, but hey, if it saves a cactus, it's worth it. I'm writing that down, cactus condoms.
That's a good one.
We'll have to get a picture for that. That'll be a good post on Facebook.
Only a guy would come up with that one.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
Well, you've given me an awful lot to think about and learn today, Marylee, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for being with me today and watching the replay of Flourishing Potted Gardens. And I hope that if you're not on my email list and not receiving all of the valuable information I give to keep your money out of the compost heap, I hope that you will go to potteddesert.com and sign up today. Thanks very much. Have a great day and happy potting.